In every city, there exists an invisible line, a boundary between those who rule through fear and those who endure it. But what happens when someone refuses to recognize that line? Jason Parker was 17, orphaned too young, left to run his parents' small family restaurant alone. The tables were worn, the menus faded, but it was everything to him. The last connection to a life that once made sense. In neighborhoods like this one, protection money isn't optional. It's tradition, a cost of doing business enforced by men like the one locals call the Black Dragon. "Time to pay up, kid," the Black Dragon demanded, leaning against the counter where customers usually placed their orders. "My father never paid. I won't either," Jason replied, quiet but resolute, dish towel still in hand. One word. No. 4 letters that carried the weight of defiance. In a world built on compliance, it was enough to change everything. The sound tore through the restaurant. Sharp, wet, final. The sickening crack of bone followed by a scream that sent a chill crawling across every table, every window, every chest. Jason lay on the tiled floor, his right arm bent at a wrong angle, face contorted in pain. "This is what happens when you say no," the Black Dragon shouted to the terrified diners who froze mid-meal, forks suspended in air. Across the restaurant, at a corner table near the window, a man sat quietly. He hadn't touched his coffee. He hadn't moved since the confrontation began. But now he looked up. Chuck Norris wore a simple faded jacket and a cap pulled low. No one recognized him. No one was meant to. Not yet. He stood with no drama, no flourish, one step at a time, his boots making a soft thump on the worn linoleum floor. The diners didn't notice him at first, all eyes still on Jason, but then something shifted. The Black Dragon noticed Chuck approaching between the tables, his brow furrowed. "You want to be next, Grandpa?" he barked, spreading his arms like a dare. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something the restaurant had forgotten, the weight of a man who didn't need to announce his presence to be felt. The first punch came fast, a sharp jab aimed directly at Chuck's face. It didn't land, not because Chuck was fast, but because he was precise. Every movement small, controlled, designed not to waste effort. "You dodging forever, or are you gonna hit back like a man?" the Black Dragon snapped, circling around an overturned chair. Chuck's face gave away nothing, just a faint lift of his left brow, as if he was waiting for something the other man hadn't figured out yet. The crowd was growing now, servers frozen with trays, cooks peering from the kitchen door, diners pressing against the windows from outside. They weren't cheering, they weren't shouting, they were just watching, silent, the same kind of silence Chuck carried inside him. The Black Dragon lunged again, this time with a low kick aimed at Chuck's thigh. It landed. Chuck didn't flinch. The Black Dragon smirked, feeling the contact through his shin. But his satisfaction lasted half a second, because Chuck wasn't resisting the strike. He was reading it, absorbing it, learning from it. "I don't miss twice," Chuck finally spoke, calm, steady, inevitable. And then Chuck moved, a single elbow strike, clean, tight, close range. It hit center mass. The Black Dragon staggered back 2 steps, knocking into a table of abandoned plates. Wind knocked from him. The crowd didn't cheer. They held their breath. The Black Dragon's lungs burned. He hadn't expected this, not from a man who hadn't thrown more than a single elbow, not from someone who hadn't even raised his voice. And yet here he was, backpedaling after one hit, one clean, silent blow that felt like it had come from the restaurant itself. "Lucky shot," he muttered, more for himself than anyone else. "You won't get another." He came in faster this time. A sharp right cross struck Chuck clean across the cheek. Blood, a thin line of it, crept down from the corner of Chuck's lip. He staggered back 2 steps, not out of fear, but because physics demanded it. Chuck reset his feet, wiped the blood away with the back of his hand. His eyes never left the man in front of him. The black dragon launched a front kick aimed at Chuck's ribs. It landed with a heavy thud, sending Chuck stumbling back against a serving station. Glasses crashed to the floor. The crowd recoiled, unsure. The silence that had once felt reverent began to tilt toward dread. "You're not built for this," the black dragon growled, circling between tables. "You came here for a meal. I live here." Chuck didn't speak, but something in his shoulders shifted, almost imperceptibly. The black dragon lunged again, this time spinning with a back fist. It caught the edge of Chuck's jaw, sending him stumbling sideways into a decorative column. Blood now trickled from both corners of his mouth, his breathing harder. And still he stood. The black dragon saw an opening and rushed in, hand cocked for a knockout blow. Chuck looked up, not in fear, but in calculation. He let the punch fly, then leaned just enough for it to miss. He pushed up and in that same motion drove a tight, compact fist straight into the black dragon's exposed ribs, right below the floating rib. The sound wasn't loud, but the reaction was. The black dragon gasped, staggering back, eyes wide. The pain wasn't just physical, it was psychological. That moment when you realize you gave a man his opening. Chuck stepped in closer than was comfortable, too close for wide strikes. Elbow to the shoulder, palm to the sternum, pivot, another elbow to the chin. The black dragon's rhythm broke. He stumbled. Chuck caught the collar of his jacket and slammed him into the bar counter. The black dragon roared, swinging wildly. Chuck ducked, redirected momentum, and flung him sideways into a rack of dishes. Porcelain burst apart. The black dragon collapsed in a heap of broken plates and scattered silverware. He scrambled up, now with sauce on his face and sweat streaking down his temple. He looked around for anything and found a serving tray among the debris. He grabbed it and swung. Chuck ducked under the arc, stepped inside, and drove a knee into the black dragon's stomach, doubling him over. Then he caught the tray and twisted it from the man's grip. "I beat real fighters," the black dragon gasped. "I fought in rings, dojos. You're nobody." Chuck's voice came low, calm. "Then you already know what happens when your form breaks down." The black dragon screamed in frustration and grabbed a nearby mop leaning against the wall. He swung it like a staff. Chuck didn't move. He waited. The swing came. Chuck sidestepped, caught the handle, twisted it, and the black dragon lost control again. The mop spun through the air and clattered across the floor. Chuck didn't even watch it fall. The black dragon dropped to one knee beside an overturned table. Chuck approached step by step, quiet as ever, his shadow falling over the man. For the first time, real fear entered the black dragon's face. He tried to get up, legs trembling, mouth open. A punch came, but it was weak, desperate, full of loss. Chuck didn't block. He let it graze his shoulder and replied with a single, punishing elbow to the man's jaw. Crack. The black dragon's head snapped sideways, his legs gave out, and he collapsed on both knees to the tile floor, gasping. "Strength never had to shout," Chuck said quietly, then turned away. But the black dragon still wouldn't surrender. In one final, desperate effort, he charged. Wild, reckless, primal. Chuck waited. The man swung a heavy overhand meant to be a last word. Chuck slipped it easily. And then it happened. The restaurant held its breath. Chuck's right foot slid half a step outward, body coiled, balance flawless, shoulders loose, eyes locked. Every part of him spoke the language of discipline. This wasn't performance. This wasn't revenge. This was punctuation. In one fluid motion, Chuck pivoted. His left foot became the anchor, his hips rotated with surgical precision. The torque traveled up through his spine, and as he turned, his right leg snapped out like a whip. It wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but it was perfect. A roundhouse kick that cut through air like a blade. It connected directly with the black dragon's chest just beneath the collarbone, sending shock waves through bone, muscle, pride. The sound of impact echoed through the restaurant like a thunderclap trapped in a canyon. The man's body lifted slightly, feet leaving the ground for a fraction of a second. Then he flew backward, arms flailing, breath gone, eyes wide. He slammed into the glass dessert display case with a shattering crash so sharp it turned heads across the block. The sound rang out like a final bell, and then silence. Real silence. The kind that arrives when something ends. The black dragon collapsed in a heap of glass and pastries, his body crumpled sideways, one leg twitching once, then still. He wasn't unconscious, but something in him had shut off. The fight, the defiance, the myth, gone.
Chuck stood still, right leg retracting smoothly back into a neutral stance. No smile, no roar of victory, just a man returning to stillness. The crowd didn't cheer, they couldn't. They were frozen because they had just seen something few people ever do, the end of fear. A waiter dropped his notepad not from clumsiness but because he forgot it was in his hand. A chef pressed a palm to his chest. One elderly patron removed his glasses, holding them to his chest, as if mourning for the arrogance just buried. Chuck approached Jason, who still sat against the wall, clutching his broken arm, eyes locked wide on the scene he had just witnessed. The crowd parted silently as Chuck moved through them like the tide, making way for the moon. "You held your ground," he said. "That's the part that matters." Jason nodded slowly, lips trembling. "I thought I was alone." Chuck looked around, dozens of faces quiet, watching, but no longer afraid, not anymore. "Jason wins!" as Chuck helped him to his feet, the weight of his broken arm supported gently by the man who had just undone years of fear in a matter of minutes. A taxi driver who had been eating his lunch jumped up before Chuck even asked. "I'll take him," the man said, nodding quickly. "Nearest hospital, fast." Chuck helped Jason outside to the cab, making sure he was seated gently, arms secure. "You're going to be okay," Chuck said, his voice calm, grounding. "Stay steady. You already did the hard part." Jason tried to speak, but emotion clamped his throat. He swallowed hard and forced out a whisper. "Thank you." As the taxi pulled away, Chuck turned back, and now the restaurant faced him, not one by one, but as a whole. Waiters, cooks, regular patrons with napkins still on their laps, children clinging to their parents. No one spoke, and yet everything had changed. One man stepped forward, the head chef with worry lines carved into his forehead. "We've been waiting for someone like you," he said quietly, removing his toque. An elderly woman with a cane and trembling fingers touched her hand to her heart. "You didn't just fight for that boy," she said. "You fought for all of us." Chuck walked past them slowly, eyes scanning the faces, not for praise, for certainty. He needed to know it had sunk in. It had. Fear was no longer the currency of the restaurant. It had been replaced by memory. No one would forget what they saw today, and more importantly, no one would forget what silence can do when it stands tall and does not flinch. A busboy stepped forward, phone in hand, face flushed with adrenaline. "Sir, can I just ask who you are?" Chuck turned his head slightly. His eyes met the boy's. The teen froze. Chuck gave the smallest shake of his head, and that was answer enough. The boy lowered the phone, tucked it into his back pocket. Some names don't need to be said. They live in moments, not headlines. As Chuck approached the coat rack where he'd placed his jacket, a young hostess, maybe 15, was already there, holding it in both arms. She stared up at Chuck, wide-eyed. "I kept it clean," she said. Chuck took it, nodded, and began to slide it over his shoulders, but the girl didn't move. She stood there, shoulders squared with something new, something she hadn't felt before, not just admiration, aspiration. Chuck looked down at her just for a second, then reached out and with surprising gentleness placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saw it all?" Chuck asked. The girl nodded. Chuck leaned in slightly. "Then remember this. Strength isn't how hard you hit. It's how long you can stand when no one else will." The girl nodded again, this time slower, like it meant something more now. Chuck turned and began walking toward the door, alone. No one followed, no one asked for autographs, no one begged for a name, because they knew whatever had just happened. Here didn't belong on a trending tab. It belonged to the restaurant, to the shards of glass still glinting on the floor, to the silence left behind. The black dragon still lay in a crumpled heap against the broken display case. No one moved to help him, not out of cruelty, but because even mercy needs to be earned. Chuck disappeared through the door, boots thumping softly on the threshold, and long after he was gone from sight, the restaurant stood still, not in fear, but in reverence. Slowly, people began to right overturned chairs, sweep up broken dishes, and speak in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. The most horrifying thing wasn't that the black dragon broke Jason's arm, but that an entire restaurant watched in silence until one single person decided that, rather than live with fear, he would rather die for truth. The world doesn't need more men who shout. It needs more who stand quietly when it matters most.